My name is Héctor Pizarro and I am posting this video from Santiago, Chile on October 24, 2019. My family, friends and colleagues abroad have been asking me how we are in these days of unrest and hopefully change in this country. I appreciate your concern and kind words, and I will now share my views on the situation, try to make some sense of it and see what solutions are on the horizon. I was at Plaza Italia yesterday to demonstrate peacefully because, like many others, I believe in the power of expressing disapproval to the government in the form of non-violent action. Our own president has acknowledged that right, which is a constitutional right, but unfortunately, peaceful demonstration at Plaza Italia became chaotic when police came with their tear gas cannons. I made this short clip there.
This was a completely peaceful demonstration. I was here, there were families, there were people, just normal civilians, and then the police started to attack us with this stuff. Look at that. If you get that thing in your eyes, then you're in trouble. It doesn't look good, but it was then the police that started all this with their provocation.
It was a massive protest with 20 blocks full of people from Plaza Italia down Alameda towards the city center, and also coming from the east, from Providencia. There were families, even children there. Plaza Italia was absolutely crowded. And suddenly the police came with that huge water and tear gas cannon vehicle that you see in the video. Then some people started to throw stones at them as they tried to disperse the crowd, and the situation escalated. The whole square, which minutes before was full of people, became a battlefield. That truck would stay still for a few minutes and then charge over and over again. I got some of that spray in my eyes, which was actually very painful. Well, I guess that's the point of tear gas, isn't it? As you see in the clip, I'm not covering my face because I had the constitutional right to be there. I didn't throw things at the police either. So all the interaction I had with the police was at the receiving end. I actually thought it was plain water coming from the cannon, but no, it was a nasty substance. The police also shot tear gas rounds at demonstrators. They fire them directly at people, and you can only hope that they won't hit people directly in the face. By the way, there were some badass protesters who would pick the canisters up and throw them back at the police. All of these is unfortunate dynamics. These things shouldn't really be happening here. I don't think it's a good idea when the authorities escalate a peaceful demonstration. The clever thing is de-escalation, and they are supposed to be in charge. They should know that and use force responsibly. I am fully aware that there are furious people in the crowd, mostly young men who want to express their frustration more physically by throwing things at the police, and that they also provoke the police. It's a difficult balance for the authorities, I'm sure. Should they stay a few blocks away and let people demonstrate in peace? Unfortunately, there are also vandals and delinquents hiding among the peaceful demonstrators. I also condemn their actions. They are actually not welcome among the peaceful crowd, and several of us were actually telling them off. I also keep in mind that the government has declared a state of emergency and curfew, and that waives, at the government's discretion, the right of assembly. But as I mentioned, Piñera has acknowledged himself people's right to demonstrate, and then the police should use the right tactics. I don't have the final answers here. It's a complex and volatile situation. And of course, when people start looting, vandalizing, or even torching places, the police needs to react and arrest people. Chile is now on its seventh day of emergency and curfew. The military are also on the streets with 20,000 troops. So the situation is fragile, and 18 people have so far lost their lives in fires, accidents, and other events related to the unrest. Of those 18, 5 have been killed by police or the military. But why did this happen? The short version is because of the inequality that corrodes Chilean society. Because within its macroeconomic prosperity, a shameful reality is hidden. The current crisis of our democracy has been triggered by a model that manages to generate wealth but distributes it unequally. Now, the long version, so please bear with me. Chile is by far the most unequal country in the OECD, with 26% of wealth concentrated in the hands of 1% of the population. There is also low social mobility, which means that if you are born in the poorest 10% of the population, then there is a high probability that your children will be poor. And conversely, a person born in the richest 10% has a high probability that their children will be in the wealthiest 10%. These inequalities are unfair, no doubt about it, because they violate the principle of equality among human beings. Say a talented girl, but born into a poor family, in a poor district, will go to a school of poor quality and low performance, and then she may never be able to bridge the gap between her and an equally talented girl born in a wealthy district to a wealthy family. That difference, that gap, is unfair because it violates the principle of equality. Because for both girls, the same rules of the game will not apply. And as time goes by, these differences become structural and permanent disparities. 11% of poor students graduate compared to 84% of rich students. These situations are not only unfair, but they are a failure if we want to improve society and its future viability and competitiveness. Because let's consider the genetic pool. By graduating mostly the well-off people, it means that the best jobs, the best opportunities will be available only to a small social group. Does it mean that they are smarter? No, by no means, only more fortunate and more privileged. So when students have to drop out of school because of poverty, it means that creativity, that brain capacity, that potential is lost. That intelligent girl I mentioned will have to work in some factory or in services for the rest of her life. And don't get me wrong, I have nothing against the rich. Good for them if they made it. I oppose the structural inequality in society. Those differences and inequalities result, among other things, in our Minister of Economy, Juan Andrés Fontaine, recommending to his suffering fellow citizens to get up earlier to take the subway before peak hours. Because let me explain that part to you. A few days ago, which was actually what triggered all of this, the Santiago Metro increased its fare by 30 pesos, which is $0.041, leaving it at 830 pesos, which is $1.14, during the peak hours. The metro system works with a differentiated fare depending on the hour. The 830 pesos fare would be applicable during peak hours. It was this factor that led Minister Fontaine to propose the great idea that people should get up earlier, take the subway earlier, and thus pay a reduced fare. Why take the subway at 8 a.m. when you can take it at 6 a.m. and save a few pesos? So, when someone mocks you in your face, it's natural to get upset. Speaking of the subway, the poorest Chileans spend 30% of their income in transportation costs, while for the affluent, the percentage is only 2%. What Minister Fontaine said indicates or is evidence of that the model creates a lack of concern and indifference about the lives of others. Worse still, the people he was mocking are required to organize their lives in a way that they can continue to fulfill their role in this model we have here, where most people must work hard for low pay with little hope of improvement and little hope for a better future, better life. The principle of equality among human beings is being breached. Their disadvantaged position is considered normal by the system. It is not strange then that they get a feeling of being treated in an undignified manner, which in this case, as we are seeing, has generated resentment. So, therefore, it is not only that resources are being unequally distributed, but that the system has established gaps that are impossible to overcome. Working people also want to benefit from the good life. They also want to be a part of it, but the current model does not make it possible. The current model requires a lot of consumption. That is, that people spend money in spite of their low wages. What is the solution to that? Borrowing. In Chile, it is very easy to obtain consumer loans. Most of the time, you only need an ID, a job, and a good credit record. No further questions are asked. And large supermarket chains offer their own credit cards, which can be used to finance food purchases. This allows supermarkets, which belong to large economic groups, to profit not only from the sale of their products, but also from the high interests applied to these consumer credits. 30 years ago, the military dictatorship ended. The center-left coalition governments that followed Patricio Aylwin, Eduardo Frei, Ricardo Lagos, Michelle Bachelet's first government, and then her second one, after Piñera's first government, simply gave continuity to Pinochet's economic model. So the central left dedicated themselves to managing it. They conformed to a liberal economic policy. Therefore, Chile is a country with superb macroeconomics, whose indicators are cheered by the International Monetary Fund, but the working class, those who have to take the subway, do not applaud. The government often says that fiscal funds are limited. There is not enough money for the big projects of our society, like free education, health insurance, better health services, unemployment benefits, welfare, and so on. So people will be asked, do you want a free university for your children or a better pension? Both two wishes, both legitimate, are not compatible because the fiscal budget is tight. That's what we hear. The problem arises when a part of the country does seem to be able to fulfill each of their wishes without limitations. So let's see. In Chile, the poor have subsidized the rich for the past 30 years. When the system allows companies to operate in a benign regime with low taxation and paying minimum wages to their workers, then those workers are financing the wealth of the companies. And this is not the socialist yapping, it is just common sense. In a fair system, the state would collect appropriate taxes from corporations and high earners, which would be used, among other things, to finance education and health, and certainly reform the pension system. That system that we have here, that we call AFP or pension funds, is a chapter in itself. Imagine that at the end of a working life, on a minimum wage, you receive a minimum pension, which is not enough to live on either. Not good. At the same time, we are witnessing a process of privatization of natural resources. Our country is probably the only one in the world where water is private. Some rivers are private here. In a model that remains embodied in Pinochet's constitution, we see public resources transformed into private property. In northern Chile, 80% of water bodies are owned by mining companies. And there's another situation, even more unfair, because then we're talking about poverty and discrimination, is the situation of our indigenous communities, of the Mapuche. That is also a whole chapter in itself. So in Chile, there is a deep and rightful citizen distrust of all institutions, of all branches of the state, the executive, the legislative, and the judicial, and also of supposedly moral bastions such as the Catholic Church, because of the generalized pedophilia and priests and bishops either perpetrating it or covering it up. There is also distrust of the corporate world because of severe cases of collusion, which are secret agreements that limit open competition by defrauding consumers. And of course, the usual businessmen financing political campaigns in exchange of favors when the politicians are in office. Maybe that's not a Chilean only thing, though. In declaring the state of emergency and curfew, President Piñera said he was at war, not against peaceful demonstrators, but against violent supermarket looters. The timing of this rhetoric, though, couldn't have been more unfortunate, because it happened when the military trucks started to roll on the streets. I'm sure there was no bad intention, and Piñera was stressed and only meant to speak harshly. The problem is that most of the people in the streets were peaceful demonstrators, not looters or vandals. To be fair, he has later apologized for his words. The point I'm trying to make is that the government never saw this coming, which only proves that politicians are really detached from the people that elected them. And how about the opposition then? Should they take over and give it a go? Are they any better than the government? Absolutely not. The whole Chilean political class is discredited by its unfulfilled promises, its tendency to nepotism and corruption, its mediocrity and ineffectiveness. Seeing politicians on television these days is like a constant facepalm. They line up to dust off their electoral promises and their discourse of social justice, prosperity for everybody, and blah, blah, blah. Politicians in both government and opposition are all colleagues. Politics is their job, is their line of work, their shop. Is there any solution? From the outset, it is necessary to know that the very moment when a democratic government declares a state of emergency and curfew in numerous cities, with the streets being patrolled by soldiers, it is a defeat, a system failure. Therefore, the system must be changed. It is evident that Chile demands a new social contract, which is what they are calling it now. And this is happening long overdue. Inequality is a problem, and a serious one. A time bomb, as we have seen. The solution depends on a fairer distribution of Chile's economic wealth. We're talking about redistribution of wealth. Only with equality will we be able to feel part of the same project, of a country that is moving forward together and in peace. The solution requires a broad and inclusive, serious and responsible dialogue that includes the whole of society. Students, the academic community, grassroots social organizations, and unavoidably, of course, the government and opposition politicians, these usual operators. There are some good signs, as Piñera is reportedly meeting some organizations and intellectuals and not only politicians. He also said yesterday that he is now listening humbly to the public. And by the way, he also reversed the subway fare increase. I honestly wish him good luck. So maybe it's time for summarizing all of this. Someone explained what has happened in Chile by saying it wasn't the 30 pesos increase in the subway fare, but the 30 years of abuse. We all want to return to normality. We all want the military to return to their barracks. So, yes, we all want peace and prosperity for everybody. Those who hold economic and political power must do something. Perhaps this time they have understood that a change is necessary, a fundamental change, a structural change. A more egalitarian society is instrumental to the social peace we all wish for.